Hi everyone, this is Helen from Helen Westwood Maths. I've been doing loads and loads of different sessions on fractions this week, so I thought I'd just jump on and just talk through and share an example of adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing fractions, and just talk about some things that it's really important to remember when you're working with fractions. So starting with adding fractions, this is one of the four operations when you need a common denominator. Okay, so you need to have the same bottom number to add fractions. And just to show you how much easier this makes it, if you've got 2/7 and you add 3/7, then that will give you an answer of 5/7. Now, if we've got fractions that have different denominators, so if I said we were adding 2/3 and 4/5, you can see this isn't as straightforward as the first example that I did because we haven't got the same bottom number. So what I have to do here is I have to use my equivalent fractions, and when I've been doing that with students this week, I actually put a little workings box just to remind me that I'm working with my equivalent fractions. So with equivalent fractions, this is just a different way of writing an equivalent amount, an equivalent fraction. And the important thing here is we have to think about a number that both 3 and 5 go into. And another way you can always come up with a number that will work will be to times them together. So what we're going to do is we're going to think, okay, we want to write an equivalent fraction for 2/3. We want to write an equivalent fraction for 4/5, and I've worked out that 15 is going to be a common denominator. So what do I need to times 3 by to get 15? I need to times it by 5. Now with our equivalent fractions, we need to times the top and bottom by the same number. So 2/3 is going to be the same as 10/15 because I've multiplied 2 by 5 to get 10. So instead of 2/3, I'm going to write 10/15. Then when I've got 4/5, I'm going to times the top and bottom by 3 because 5 times 3 gives me 15. So 4 times 3 gives me 12. So that gives me 12/15. And then when I'm adding my fractions together, just like you saw before, we add our top numbers together, so our numerators together, the bottom number will stay as 15. So the answer I've got here will come out as a top-heavy fraction as 22/5. Now, if we get a top-heavy fraction, we can change that into a mixed number. Remember that 15/15 will give us 1 whole. So that's going to be 1 whole with 7 left over. So that will be 1 and 7/15. I'll do a separate video on how to convert between mixed numbers and improper fractions another time. We'll focus on the calculations today. So moving on to subtracting fractions, we also need a common denominator when we subtract fractions. So if I said, okay, what do you think 8/9 take away 3/9 would be? That would give us 5/9. Okay, so now let's imagine we've got 8/9 take away 1/4. So we haven't got the same bottom number. So again, we need to use our equivalent fractions. We're going to do those in our working square. So we're going to change 8/9 or 8/9 and 1/4 to being a fraction with the same bottom number. Okay, so we've got to think about what bottom number can we use. So what common denominator are we going to use? It's got to be a number that both 9 and 4 go into. So I'm going to use 36. And then just like before, the way that we find our equivalent fractions is we've got to multiply the top and bottom by the same number. So what do I multiply 9 by to get 36? I times it by 4. So that means 8/9 is the same as 32/36. And then when I'm changing 1/4 to a fraction over 36, I've got to times the top and bottom by 9. So 1/4 is going to be 9/36. So then what I do, I go back to my calculation and I replace those fractions with my equivalent fraction. So I've worked out that 8/9 is equivalent to 32/36. So I'm going to write that first. And 1/4 is equivalent to 9/36. So then when I do the subtraction, I do 32 over 36, take away 9 over 36, which gives me 23 over 36, because once I've got them with the same denominator, I just subtract the numerators. So that's adding and subtracting. So moving on to multiplying fractions. When we're multiplying fractions, we do not need a common denominator. Okay, so if we do 2/3 multiplied by 4/5, what we can do here is we can multiply the numerators together and we can multiply the denominators together. So we can times together 2 times 4 for the numerator, 3 times 5 for the denominator. That's going to give us 8 over 15. Now sometimes we can cancel or simplify before we do our workings. So if I gave you something like 4/10 times 5 over 12, we could do it the method we've just done, and that would get us 20 over 120, but you can see we'd have quite a lot of simplifying to do there. We could divide the top and bottom by 20. Now we can do some simplifying, or we can do some cancelling before we do some workings. So what we need to do is we can look at what number can we cancel from the top and bottom. And you can see here where I've crossed out in red, we can divide those numbers by 4. So instead of 4, I can write 1, and instead of 12, I can write 3. And then if I look at the other pair of numbers, because when I cancel or simplify a fraction, I've just got to divide the top and bottom by the same number. And then I can divide the 10 and 5 by 5, because 5 divided by 5 is 1. 10 divided by 5 is 2. So that means we can have an equivalent calculation as 1 over 2, or 1/2, times 1/3. And that gives us an answer of 1/6. Now if we come back to this 20 over 120 that I got from just timesing the numerators together and timesing the denominators together, if I cancel this down by dividing the top and bottom by 20, you can see I also get this answer of 1/6. Okay, so last thing I'm going to go through is with our dividing fractions. Now you might see this nice little sort of reminder of what we need to do when we divide fractions. So it's often summarised with keep, change, flip, and that's what we do if we have a division, something like this. So 4/5 divided by 2/3. And the way I like to introduce this is I like to say to my students, what do you think 30 divided by a half is? And a lot of people, they instantly think of working out what half of 30 is, and they say, oh, that's 15. But actually, if you do 30 divided by a half, you get an answer of 60. Because if you imagine 30 pizzas split into halves, how many halves would you have? You'd have 60 of them. And that's also because it's the same as 30 times 2 over 1, which would be 60 over 1, and therefore just 60. So coming back to our example here, we've got 4/5, which is what we keep. So we keep that first fraction the same. Thank you very much, Kelly. That's fantastic. That's lovely feedback. I'm really pleased that you think this is helpful. So keep, change, flip. So we're going to change the division to a times, and then when we flip the fraction, we find what's called the reciprocal, which we just sort of turn the fraction upside down. Okay, so rather than 2 over 3, it's 3 over 2. And now we use the multiplying that we've just done. So sometimes I write this little reminder just at our stage that we're working, keep, change, flip. So we've just done the multiplying on the previous slide, so we know we times the numerators together to get 12, and then we times the denominators together. 5 times 2 will give us 10. And then when we've got that top heavy fraction, we can change into a mixed number. How many times does 10 go into 12? That's once, and we'll have 2 remainders, so that's going to be 1 and 2/10. So just remember, adding and subtracting fractions, that's when you need a common denominator. I've just been working with someone this evening who started using common denominators with multiplying. Multiplying fractions is where we multiply the tops together, multiply the bottoms together. We can do some simplifying before, or we can cancel at the end. And then finally, with dividing fractions, what you need to remember is your keep, change, flip. Okay, thank you very much. Have a lovely evening. I'll see you online soon.